Hey guys, SimizDim Gaming here, back with another gaming video. This one, as the title suggests, is about one of the grandfathers of survival horror, and that is Alone in the Dark. This game came out on MS-DOS. MS-DOS is pre-Windows for those of you that are quite young. It came out in 1992, a whole 4.5 years before Resident Evil, and 7 years before the original Silent Hill on PS1. I can remember being really young. I was born in the late 80s. I was really young, and I can remember watching someone who was a little bit older than me play this game. And then recently, the Alone in the Dark remake got announced, and I saw gameplay of it, and it made me really want to play this for myself, as I was very young and I never got to play it for myself. So I got all of them on Steam. They were on sale. They normally do, so I'd recommend going and picking them up. And I gave it a go. Needless to say, I was a little bit mind blown on how good this game really is. One of the things that surprised me is the interaction you have. So you can see the menu here, you can fight, you can actually then hold spacebar. Bear in mind, just a little side note, this is before WASD on keyboards and a lot of mouse support. So it was the up, down, left, right arrows, spacebar and enter are basically your controls. But you can fight, and then you can actually do 4 different attacks, which is kind of cool. You can then open and search pretty much anything. Sometimes if you search something, it doesn't really say anything, but a lot of the things you can search. So that chest you can search. You can also search the cupboard the character's just pushing now, which is kind of cool. You also then have the push function, which, unlike Resident Evil, you have pretty much a full 360 degree where you can push things. It's just really interesting for a game that came out literally at the time of the video 30 years ago. One thing I don't like, there's a run mechanic. Basically you have to kind of double tap up on the up, down, left, right keys, but annoyingly it doesn't really work that well. It's very janky, and half the time it doesn't really work. It's a bit of a shame. It's like the only control I don't really like. Sit the fuck down! Touching on the combat again, for a game that came out 30 years ago, the combat is quite fluid. Bear in mind the frames, I don't know what they are, but they're definitely not 30 frames. Frame rates weren't really much of a thing back then as far as I'm aware. The game is fun and it feels smooth, but there are points where it's a little bit laggy. But again, I don't think they worried about that back then. The combat's really fun, like the handheld combat is quite fun. You hold space when you've selected the fight option in your menu, and you can do a left hook, a right hook, you can do like a back step, and you can also do a kick. That's all really fun, and it's actually kind of funny. Some of the noises that you make when you slap the enemies, as I've just shown, is actually hilarious. There is an issue with the combat. The enemies, the AI just comes straight for you and they just attack you. The only issue is if they hit you first, you can get stuck in an animation where you can't then get a hit off. So it can be kind of annoying. You can kind of get stuck into an animation until you die, basically, until you run out of health. That can be a little bit frustrating, but you have to give it the benefit of the doubt because of literally the AI of the time just being very simple. On the subject of combat still, you can literally throw any item. For example, if you use all your ammo with the rifle and you don't have the sword or a knife or anything like that, you can literally just throw your rifle at the enemy. It's quite funny as well. There's actually one part of the game where you need to throw something at a specific object. I didn't figure that out for literally like half an hour, and when I did I was kicking myself. But yeah, you can literally throw any single item you want. Segueing nicely into items as well. You can place items anywhere in the game. Doesn't matter where, you can just place them anywhere. So say like your inventory is full, you can go into a room that you know you're going to come back to later, then you can just place a couple of items in there and then maybe come back for them. It's really interesting. Bear in mind, Resident Evil didn't do that until the GameCube era in Resident Evil 0. Also, the game has one consistent storyline, but there's no like clear-cut way you have to do it. It's kind of semi-linear. You can kind of go about doing the objective like in any way you want, so you don't have to go through specific rooms or collect specific items at specific times. As long as you pick them up at some point and use them in the correct areas, it's fine. For a game, again, this old, I thought that was quite interesting. Again, you find Silent Hill is more similar in that respect to Resident Evil. Bear in mind, I'm going to be comparing these games quite a lot, because they're the two mainstream survival horror games people think of when they think of survival horror, not Alone in the Dark. One of the things I found a little bit interesting about it is, as you can see there's a jump mechanic. You don't actually get the jump mechanic until a certain part of the game. Also an interesting little point of detail as well. If you have a box of shotgun shells on your character and you manage to fall in the water, because they're paper cartridges, because it's set in 1920s Louisiana when shotgun shells were actually made with paper instead of the more modern material, they actually become useless because they get wet. Really, really interesting little feature that I liked. Another cool attention to detail, as you can see in the background here, you can go into rooms that are totally pitch black. You have to get an oil lamp, fill it with kerosene, and then you have to light it with the lighter. If you place it on the ground, it lights up the room, or you can just walk around and hold it. If you do that, you can't actually use a weapon. So it's actually a pretty cool mechanic, which again I haven't seen in that many games. In most games now, your character will just pull out a torch and light up the room. I think this was a way more fun approach to it. One thing I didn't enjoy, I may not have been paying that much attention, that is also true, but I found the game doesn't really give you that many hints on what to do. Bear in mind, games back then, and in most of the 90s, there was normally a companion guidebook, like a paper guidebook that came out with it. A lot of people would just buy the game and buy the guide and use the guide and just play through the game that way. I tried to do it without the guide. I did quite a few bits without the guide, but there were just times when I was a little bit stumped. Basically, I went through the entire game. There's a talisman that you need to get at some point in the game. I didn't get it, so I couldn't kill the final boss. I escaped the final boss, went to go out the front door, and you die, and that's the end of the game. You can't actually go back to the boss room either. So I had to do the entire game again, and then go and kill the boss and finally actually complete it. It was a little bit frustrating, and I had no idea that the talisman was even a thing until I used the guide after, so, you know, partly my fault, but I wanted to try it without a guide. But like I said, these games weren't really designed without a guide in mind. To sum this up, in my opinion, Alone in the Dark is the forefather for fixed camera angle survival horror. Resident Evil is the more famous one, but Alone in the Dark is definitely the first one. Yeah, you have games that Capcom did, like Sweet Home for example, but that was more like a top-down SNES style game, whereas this is definitely, in my opinion, and from what I can see, the first of its kind. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, however, I always like to be proved wrong. Basically, in a nutshell, I really enjoyed this game, and I recommend it to anyone that's a fan of survival horror games, especially if you're a Resident Evil fan, as I feel like Resident Evil takes a lot of inspiration from Alone in the Dark. They're quite easy to pick up as well, unlike Konami's Silent Hill titles, subtle dig there. You can pick all these up on Steam. They normally go on sale quite regularly. But that's it for the video, guys. Go pick up Alone in the Dark, it's super fun, and it still holds up quite well to this day. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. Yeah, there you go. Hell yeah. I can play it Alone in the Dark. Oh man, this is so cool. Yahoo!